KP's Video News.
That's right. It's KP's Video News, y'all. Man, it's been month of February. It's a short month. It always goes by way, way, way too fast. And it's also Black History Month. So we got like what? Today and 3 more days after today. Today is the 25th. So I'm going to get into some Black history here. Yep, get into some Black history here. We had the school that one of the elementary schools that I went to in Chicago was named after this uh, extraordinary person, extraordinary guy named Medgar Evers. And you know, I don't know, I don't know if Medgar Evers was the first school in the city of Chicago that may have been named after a black person. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm going to go out on the limb and say it probably was. We were pretty uh, conscious back in those days, man. And that school opened, I believe, in 1968 or 69. Anyway, uh, very proud of that school, man. Medgar Evers School on the south side of Chicago, 98th and Wallace there. Anyway, civil rights activist Medgar Evers served as the first state field secretary of the NAACP in Mississippi until his assassination in 1963. And civil rights activists, uh, as a civil rights activist, he organized voter registration efforts and economic boycotts and investigated crimes perpetrated against black people. Evers was assassinated outside of his Mississippi home in 1963 after years of on again, off again legal proceedings. His killer was sent to prison in 1994, and in 2017, President Barack Obama designated Evers' home as a historical landmark. Evers was born in July 1925 in Decatur, Mississippi, growing up on a Mississippi family farm. He was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1943. He fought both in France and Germany during World War II and received an honorable discharge in 1946. He went on to enroll in Alcorn College, now Alcorn State University, in Lorman, Mississippi in 1948. He married fellow student Merle Beasley during his senior year before graduating in 1952. And his early civil rights work, after initially finding work as an insurance salesman, Evers soon became involved in the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, the RCNL, proving up to the task of in his first experience as a civil rights organizer. He spearheaded the group's boycott against gas stations that refused to let black people use their restrooms. With his brother Charles Evers, also worked on behalf of the NAACP, organizing local affiliates. Evers applied to the University of Mississippi Law School in 1954 after being rejected. He volunteered to help the NAACP try to integrate the university with the lawsuit. Thurgood Marshall served as his attorney for the legal challenge to racial discrimination. While he failed to gain admission to the law school, Evers managed to raise his profile with the NAACP. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its decision in the famous Brown versus Brown education case. The decision legally ended segregation of schools, though it took many years for it to be fully implemented. Later in 1954, Evers became the first field secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi and moved his family to Jackson. As a field secretary, Evers traveled around Mississippi extensively, recruiting new members for the NAACP and organizing voter registration efforts. Evers also led demonstrations and economic boycotts of white owned companies that practiced discrimination. While a virtual unknown elsewhere, Evers was one of Mississippi's most prominent civil rights activists. He fought racial injustices in many forms, including how the state and local legal systems handled crimes against African Americans. Evers called for a new investigation into the 1955 lynching of Emmett Till, 14-year-old African American boy who was killed for talking to a white woman. Evers' efforts made him a target for those uh, who opposed racial equality and desegregation. He and his family were subjected to numerous threats and violent actions, including a firebombing of his house in May of 1963, shortly before his assassination. The first Mississippi State field secretary for the NAACP, Evers was shot in the back in the driveway of his home in Jackson uh, shortly after midnight on June 12, 1963, and he died less than an hour later in a nearby hospital. Evers was buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery, and the NAACP awarded him uh, its 1963 Spring Arm Medal. The national outrage over Evers' murder increased support for legislation that would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Immediately after Evers' death, the NAACP appointed his brother Charles to his position. Charles went on to become a major political figure in the state. In 1969, he was elected mayor of Fayette, Mississippi, becoming the first African American mayor of a racially mixed uh, South town since the Reconstruction. And a police and FBI investigation of the murder quickly unearthed a prime suspect. So that was Byron Beckwith, a white segregationist and founding Mississippi member of White Citizens Council. Despite mounting evidence against him, a rifle found near the crime scene was registered to Beckwith and his fingerprints on the scope, and several witnesses placed him in the area. Beckwith denied shooting Evers. He maintained that the gun had been stolen and produced several witnesses to testify he was elsewhere on the night of the murder. The bitter conflict over segregation surrounding two trials that followed, Beckwith received the support of some of Mississippi's most prominent citizens, including the then Governor Ross Barnett, who appeared at Beckwith's first trial to shake hands with the defendant in full view of the jury. 1964, Beckwith was set free after two all-white juries deadlocked. After Beckwith's second trial, Evers' wife moved their children to California, where she earned a degree from Pomona College and was later named to the Los Angeles Commission of Public Works. Convinced that her husband's killer had not been brought to justice, she continued to search for new evidence in the case. In 1989, the question of Beckwith's guilt was again raised when a Jackson newspaper published accounts of the files of the now defunct Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, an organization that existed during the 50s to help raise popular support for the maintenance of segregation. The accounts showed that the commission had helped lawyers for Beckwith screen potential jurors during the first two trials. A review by Hinds County District Attorney's Office found no evidence of such jury tampering, but it did locate a number of new witnesses, including several individuals who would eventually testify that Beckwith had bragged to them about the murder. In December 1990, Beckwith was again indicted for the murder. After a number of appeals, the Mississippi Supreme Court finally ruled in favor of a third trial, April 1993. 10 months later, and in 1994, nearly 31 years after Evers' death, Beckwith was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. And he died in 2001 at the age of 80 years old. So, since his untimely passing, Evers' contributions to the civil rights movement have been honored in many ways. His wife created what is now the Medgar Evers and Merle Evers Institute in Jackson, Mississippi, to continue the couple's commitment to social change. The City University of New York named one of its campuses after the slain activist. In 2009, the U.S. Navy also bestowed its name on one of its vessels. And like I said, my school, elementary school in Chicago, was named after Medgar Evers. As a matter of fact, it was built brand new from the ground up. It was not a school that the name had changed. It was named that from the beginning, and it still is named Medgar Evers. That's on the south side of Chicago. All right. Okay, we got the second hidden figure here, Mary Jackson, mathematician. Mathematician Mary Jackson was one of a small group of African American women who worked as aeronautical engineers called human computers at NASA during the space age. And Mary Jackson excelled academically at a time of racial segregation. Her math and science skills earned a position as a human computer for NASA, and she later became NASA's first black female engineer, along with the vital role in development of the space program. She helped other women and minorities advance their careers. And she was born in 1921 in Hampton, Virginia, and the daughter of Ellen Frank Winston. And she attended Hampton's all-black schools and graduated with high honors from George Phoenix Training School in 1937. 5 years later, she earned dual bachelor's degrees in mathematics and physical science from Hampton Institute. After college, Jackson took on a series of jobs, including teacher, bookkeeper, and receptionist. Then in 1951, she found employment at the NACA, which was the predecessor to NASA in Langley, Virginia. She worked at the West Computer Section as a research mathematician, known at the time as a human computer. 1953, she moved to the Compressibility Research Division of NACA. Though President Roosevelt's Executive Order 8802 prohibited discrimination in the defense industry, Virginia state law still enforced segregation in the workplace. All work facilities had separate restrooms and cafeterias designated white and colored. In the company cafeteria, whites could select their food choices and sit in the lunchroom. Black people had to make their food requests in the cafeteria attendant and then go back to their desk and eat. An experience Jackson considered indignity. So after several months of separate but equal accommodation, Jackson had had enough. She considered resigning, but a chance encounter with the supervisor changed her mind. After hearing her complaints, he invited her to work with him, and she accepted. He quickly saw her potential and encouraged her to take engineering classes. At the time, she was promoted to aeronautic engineer, making her NASA's first black female engineer, and developed expertise working with wind tunnels and analyzing data on flight experiments. By 1978, Jackson changed positions to be a human resources administrator, and she served as both Federal Women's Program Manager in the Office of EEO Programs as Affirmative Action Program Manager. From then until her retirement in 1985, she helped other women and minorities advance their careers, advising them to study and take extra courses to increase their chances of promotion. And she's been honored. So she was one of the hidden figures, like I said, that one of the people that was involved in the movie. Uh, in 2016, the story of Jackson and her colleagues, Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Vaughan, all who calculated flight trajectories for the Mercury and Apollo program in the 1960s, made it to the big screen in the movie Hidden Figures. And Janelle Monáe plays Miss Jackson in the film. Yep. Oh boy. So 2018, it was announced that Jackson Elementary in Salt Lake City, named after Andrew Jackson, would be renamed Mary W. Jackson Elementary School in honor of the groundbreaking NASA engineer. That's right. Yes, yes, yes. And on to the next person, Elijah McCoy. Elijah McCoy was a 19th century African American inventor best known for inventing lubricating devices used to make trains travel more efficient. Elijah McCoy was born in Canada to parents who had fled slavery, and McCoy trained as an engineer in Scotland as a teenager. Unable to find an engineering position in the United States, he took a job working for a railroad and subsequently invented a lubrication device to make railroad operations more efficient. His early life, he was born in May 1844 in Colchester, Ontario, Canada, to George and Mildred McCoy. McCoys were fugitive slaves that had escaped from Kentucky to Canada via the Underground Railroad. In 1847, the large family returned to the United States, settling in Gibson Landing, Michigan. Beginning at a young age, McCoy showed strong interest in mechanics, and his parents arranged for him to travel to Scotland at the age of 15 for an apprenticeship in mechanical engineering. He returned home to Michigan after becoming certified as a mechanical engineer. Despite his qualifications, McCoy was unable to find work as an engineer in the United States due to racial barriers. Skilled professional positions were not available for African Americans at the time, regardless of their training or background. McCoy accepted a position as a fireman and oiler for the Michigan Central Railroad, and it was in the line of work that he developed his first major inventions. After studying the inefficiencies inherent in the existing oil systems of oiling axles, McCoy invented a lubricating cup that distributed oil evenly over the engine's moving parts. He obtained a patent for his invention, which allowed trains to run continuously for long hours of time without pausing for maintenance. McCoy continued to refine his devices, having nearly 60 patents over the course of his life. While the majority of his inventions related to lubricating systems, he also developed designs for an ironing board and lawn sprinkler and other machines. Although McCoy's achievements were recognized in his own time, his name did not appear on the majority of the products that he devised. Lacking the capital which to manufacture his lubricators in large numbers, he typically assigned his patent rights to his employers or sold them to inventors. In 1920, toward the end of his life, McCoy formed the Elijah McCoy Manufacturing Company to produce lubricators bearing his name. And so, if you ever heard that saying, the real McCoy, that was all that happened because of this black man, Elijah McCoy. And a lot of people, there was some people out there that tried to duplicate his lubricating apparatus that he had created, but whatever they created failed. So the engineers and the people that developed trains came up with a saying: if it's not the real McCoy, we don't want it. We want the real McCoy. And that saying has existed for over 100 years. If it's not the real McCoy, I don't want it. That's right, Elijah McCoy, inventor. And so here we go with Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley, after being kidnapped from West Africa and enslaved in Boston, Phyllis Wheatley became the first African American and one of the first women to publish a book of poetry in the colonies in 1773. And she was brought to Boston, Massachusetts as an enslaved person in 1761 and was purchased by John Wheatley, a personal servant to his wife, as a personal servant for his wife. The Wheatleys educated Phyllis, and she soon mastered Latin and Greek, going on to write highly acclaimed poetry. She published her first poem in 1767, and her first volume of verse, poems on various subjects, religious and moral, in 1773. Having been freed from slavery, she later married and struggled financially, with Wheatley unable to find a publisher for a second volume of poems. Early years, a pioneering African-American poet, Wheatley was born in Senegal, Gambia, around 1753. At the age of 8, she was kidnapped and brought to Boston on an enslaved person ship. Upon her arrival, she was purchased, and she was in fragile health, and she was stolen and put into bondage to be a slave for John Wheatley's wife, Susanna. Under the family's direction, Wheatley, who was a custom at the time, adopted their name, was taken under Savannah's wing. Her quick intelligence was hard to miss, and as a result, Susanna and her 2 children taught Wheatley to read and was actively encouraged her in literary pursuits by the household. Wheatley received lessons in theology, English, Latin, and Greek. Ancient history was soon folded into the teaching, as were lessons in mythology and literature at a time when African Americans were discouraged and intimidated from learning how to read and write. Wheatley's life was an anomaly. She wrote her first published poem around age 13, and the work, a story about 2 men who nearly drowned at sea, was printed in the Newport Mercury. Other published poems followed, with several also being published, further increasing Wheatley's fame. In 1773, Wheatley gained considerable stature when her first and only book of verse, Poems of Various Subjects and Religious Moral, was published, with the writer having received patronage from Selina Hastings, the Countess of Huntingdon in England. As proof of her authorship, the volume included a preface in which 17 Boston men, including John Hancock, asserted that she had indeed written the poems in it. So, yeah, it's almost like if you had the ability to do things, they even though you did something good, they still didn't want to give you credit. And when it comes to credit's due. My grandmother, Patty Triplett, was one of the first black women that graduated from college in the state of Mississippi and became a teacher in the state of Mississippi, accredited with a degree in teaching. So, telling you, man, it's a lot of history out there that has not been told and has not been expunged on in this country. So I have to do a whole article, a whole story on my grandmother, because she was a fascinating woman, extremely fascinating person. Okay, it's KP's Video News. We winding down. February here, almost the end of Black History Month, but the history continues even after Black History Month is over. It's Black History Year. KP's Video News. That's right, y'all.